So 1 year on, let's talk about Games Workshop's Crusade mode. In your eyes, is it a pass or a fail? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking a focused look at Crusade mode in 40k, and specifically what are the things that people tend to like and dislike most about the game. Of course, Crusade being Games Workshop's narrative gameplay in 9th edition, kind of a way to turn Warhammer 40k games into a sort of role-playing game, where you develop the character and abilities of your army, heroes and war machines. We'll start with a quick recap of how Crusades work, then talk about a few of the things that I most frequently see people mention for the reasons that they play Crusade, and maybe some flaws with the system. Of course, it's a pretty big topic and everyone's experience will be different, so if you think there's anything important that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments. What do you like or dislike about Crusade, and why? So for those who haven't played Warhammer Crusade, how does it work? First up, it's a narrative system that uses the power level, not points, and is designed to make battles fit into a bit more of a narrative while you develop and flesh out your army. You start up by drawing a master roster called an order of battle. You start with 50 power level and 5 requisition points. You fill out a Crusade card for each unit, which includes naming them to try and give them a bit more character. Each time you play a game, you draw up an army list from this big master roster, which individual units you're going to take into battle. And at the start of each game you pick some agendas for the army, what sort of secret objectives they're going to be trying to achieve, while also no doubt trying to win the mission and kill the enemy. You might be investigating certain objectives, or really trying to keep one model safe or kill one enemy. At the end of each game, depending on the mission rules, you'll get requisition points or experience points. Requisition points are used to upgrade your army roster, add new units, or upgrade others, and you can use experience points to give certain units battle honours, which might make them a bit more veteran and fight a bit better in game. Sometimes when units are destroyed they might have a chance of picking up battle scars, minor debuffs that might represent the squad being broken with morale or suffering injuries. As the 9th edition codexes have come out, they've been releasing all sorts of individual rules for the armies. For example, things like the Death Guard Codex, where you could make custom diseases that would follow your army around and be inflicted on your enemies, or certain characters walking the path to demonhood, and if they acquire enough mutations, then they could aspire to be a demon prince. I think they've done quite well throughout the books of trying to add a bit more narrative and flavour to the armies, and after having a codex, the army's just a lot more in-depth Crusade-wise. Basically, as you play more games, your army will grow, your leaders and units will get more experienced, and you might develop a bit more of a narrative for your army and what they're trying to achieve. I think that the main idea is to try and have Crusade armies kind of level up at the same time, playing a roughly equivalent amount of games, and you could just do that by random pickup games or actually take part in some sort of greater narrative campaign. At least theoretically though, more experienced Crusade armies should be somewhat balanced against newer ones, as all these upgrades and extras mean that enemy armies will start with more command points. It does at least go some way to levelling out the playing field. So what are the things that people tend to like the most about Crusade then? I think perhaps the main draws to the system is that it really helps build a narrative for your army, and feels like games have a bit more purpose and actually mean something going forward more than whether or not you actually just won the individual battle. I think developing your own fluff and lore for your army is really quite a big and quite nice aspect of 40k, and for some players might just get overlooked a little in favour of gameplay and painting. Crusade mode kind of gently encourages you to do this. Naming units will mean that they just have a bit more of a defined character in your head. For example, these Imperial Guard veterans aren't just a random squad, they're now Sergeant Smith's Hellraisers, with a particular preference for shotguns and plasma fire. And as they go on to level up throughout the course of your Crusade, you might genuinely start to care a bit more as to whether or not they survive each game, as you might want them to be earning more experience points to level up, or not get wiped out to a man and risk acquiring battle scars. For the armies with codexes as well, there can be really quite good narrative aspects to that, such as say a Space Marine hero that gets injured being interred into a dreadnought, meaning that you can actually change models occasionally to physically manifest your story in the game. I think the other major advantage is that it means that all games will generally serve a bit more of a purpose into a greater narrative, and that can give you a bit more enthusiasm for playing, other than literally just whether or not you win or lose the game. It means that it could be equally important just to fight for survival, scoring Crusade objectives or achieving agendas, not just literally whether or not you happen to beat the other army in any one game. Win or lose, there's a good chance that you might get some fun effects after the game, depending on if any armies get battle scars or get enough experience points to get promoted. I think there are plenty of other advantages to the system as well. Maybe one that it helps signpost a bit more of a casual mindset rather than cutthroat competitive gameplay. Generally, Games Workshop just tries to signpost people that if you want to play a more balanced game, play matched play. If you want to focus on fun and narrative, then maybe play Crusade. I think that can actually be quite helpful for some players if they want to go for a game with a certain casual mindset, as opposed to having potential mismatch when you're having someone who turns up with a very casual list against someone who brings something really strong. I think it's good for slow growing a collection as well. You could start out with quite a small army, and then as you go through the Crusade you can use those requisition points to buy in more units. I think generally with going for a bit more of a casual mindset and focusing on the narrative, you are likely to see a bit more army variety and more fluffy choices. Often you might see things played in Crusade that just don't see any sort of table time in match play, just because the points just aren't quite there for them for making them strong. Finally, there's also quite a bit of supplemental support for them, such as these new Warzone mission packs that they're coming out with, like that Plague Purge one for example. Obviously those do cost a bit, but I think it's quite nice to have the option for more content should you really want it, if the base game from the core rulebook is just feeling a little bit overplayed. So overall, I do think that there's quite a lot of positives to Crusade, though of course it isn't without its criticisms. Here are just a few of the things that I've heard voiced about Crusade that have been an issue from time to time, at least for some people. A few people are a little bit unhappy that it's somewhat monopolised narrative play, and maybe people aren't running quite as many campaigns or their own custom missions as they might have been previously. Though to be fair, I think it is perfectly possible to run a narrative campaign alongside using Crusade armies. It just might put a bit more burden on organisation if you both have to organise the Crusade points and any other mechanics that you have going. Excessive bookkeeping is certainly a criticism that can be levelled at Crusade. I think having the bookkeeping for small amounts of units really is quite fun and does add a lot of narrative, but if your Crusade force gets really quite big, it could be a bit of a chore to try and keep track of every single unit, and you just might not care quite as much about adding in your third or fourth troops choice compared with the ones that you already have. Potentially after each game you might have a fair bit of bookkeeping, working out which units get how many points and applying all the traits and benefits, and then remembering those traits and benefits for the next game. Perhaps at some point they might develop the Warhammer app to be a bit more Crusade friendly. I feel like bookkeeping could be something that an app might be able to help with. I've seen at least a few people be a bit annoyed that they're only able to use power level, not points if they want to. Power level does have the advantage of quite quick list building and also enforcing a bit more of a casual mindset, but I kind of feel like an option to use points would kind of be nice. I think maybe if you have a group of like-minded players though, it isn't the hardest thing to implement. Just simply swap out every one power level with 20 points, and you'd likely get something that's somewhat workable. Perhaps the single biggest gripe with Crusade at the moment is that it's usually going to be significantly more fun for the factions that do have codexes compared with the ones without. The battle honours, relics and upgrades are all kind of okay from the main rulebook, but a lot of them just don't really work all that well with certain factions, or you might just get quite a lot of units that need to take the same upgrade, otherwise they just don't really get any benefit. The armies with codexes have it far easier and have a lot more fun choices, and until your army does get a codex, it can be a bit of a turn-off playing Crusade. I'm certainly not saying that the core rules aren't fun, but having twice the content and content that's flavoured towards your individual army, I'd say is generally going to be more fun. I did touch on it earlier, but there can be a bit of a power imbalance between developed Crusade armies and newer ones. This does kind of depend a little bit on how people are playing their Crusade army, and there's going to be quite a big difference between people who are just rolling for all of their upgrades or actually picking and choosing them to get the strongest stuff. It says that you can do either as per the rules, and obviously picking things is going to be stronger than rolling. Of course 40k is a big game, and all of the rules in the core book are kind of fairly generic. It does mean that there is the potential for some really quite strong combos on certain units, where other units just might not get all that much of benefit. In general, if someone is playing a Crusade army and they have been picking the strongest upgrades for their units, in general it might mean that you're at a bit of a disadvantage if you're just starting out with your Crusade army. The command point bonus does go some way to mitigating that, but it does add a bit more of a wild card in there. I think kind of because of that, Crusade in particular could do with a good group of like-minded players who all have a fairly similar goal of what they want to achieve with playing. If everyone's going to pick their Crusade upgrades and go for the strongest things, then that's kind of fine, it'll probably balance out somewhat. But if some players are picking all the stronger units and picking the strongest upgrades for them, and some players are literally just taking whatever and rolling their upgrades, it's kind of likely that the games are going to get a bit one-sided. It's hardly a problem that's unique to Crusade though, that's kind of the case for everything in 40k. Generally a good pre-game discussion is going to be needed before you play, just to make sure that people are going for the same sort of mindset, whether that's competitive or more casual. I'd generally say that if you're playing Crusade and you're trying to min-max every choice, then you might be better with playing off in match play in the first place. Finally, amongst the group of people, you would need a bit of commitment. Ideally, you'd want a group of people who are going to be fairly regularly playing games and aren't just going to play a couple of games then stop, as otherwise you might have invested quite a lot of bookkeeping for not really all that much return. Overall though, I'd say that Crusade is definitely a pass more than a fail for Warhammer 40k. The reception seems to be largely positive from the community, and it genuinely seems to have taken off in quite a few playgroups, where some people it's the norm to play Crusade games now rather than matched. I think that Games Workshop have done pretty well with implementing a system that adds a bunch of other fun, fluffy rules and gets a bit of narrative progression going, while also having it kind of compartmentalized so you can either play Crusade mode if you like it, or you can completely ignore it if you just want to play matched. I think Crusade certainly has its pitfalls, some imbalances, content disparity, and excessive bookkeeping, but none of these are really insurmountable problems, particularly for a group of people who are going to try and focus on everyone having fun. So anyway, let me know what you think about Warhammer Crusade down in the comments. I look forward to hearing your insights. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly try and keep the 40k content coming, with new videos out near enough every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the content on the channel, I would just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good to you, then the link is down in the video description. Feel free to check it out if you'd like. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.